welcome to the Cocoa Heads December also from my side. I'm Nikolas Mayr, and I'm going to introduce to you the JSON class generator. We heard a little bit about how it's important it is to have quality code, to have performance, and speed is also an issue in terms of the development process. You want to get things done fast, and I think this tool can help you with this in the future. And let me go a little bit into the history where it's coming from. So I've been an iOS developer for some time. I started in 2010, and one of my first apps was some app that uses WSDL and a web service that was defined in WSDL to communicate with some server, and my task was to upgrade to a new version of the web service. So the easy thing I did was, okay, I changed the version from 2 to 3 and see what happens. So the app still works, it starts, but on the first screen I see a null string. So where does the null string come from? And this is very easily explained, the way the response was parsed. So the response was an XML. The programmer had used an XML library to go through the tree and then pick out the information that was interesting to him. So the point here was that due to the refactoring of the service, the information he was looking for is not in the same place anymore. So an easy approach would be, okay, then just look in the new place. But I thought that this is a bad idea because if I upgrade to yet another version of the service, then I run into the same problems. So I searched a little bit on the internet and I found a tool called WSDL to Objective-C. So what it did for me is it generated all the model files, which were the classes and enums, and also a lot of request classes, which contained all the service methods I could access. And all those methods would return objects of proper classes. And the only thing then I had to do after I generated the code was to use the properties. So I went through something.name.whatever, and I got the information that I wanted. So all these upgrading to a new API version using this WSDL to Objective-C tool took me half a day. And I think this is quite a short time, but also it's not so I mean, it's pretty obvious if this code is generated, so I didn't have to do so much. And the good thing about it, since the web service was precisely defined in the WSDL file, also the server was complying to this WSDL file, and the code that or the data structures on both ends would just perfectly match and everything would work out of the box. And as said already, there's easy access now via properties, no searching through dictionaries. And there's compile time checks now because I have classes. If something will change in the future and I need to regenerate the code for a new API version, then I will get a compile error at every place where something doesn't match up anymore. So this is very convenient and very future-proof, and I like this approach really a lot. And I thought, oh, web services are cool. They're easy. They will always work like this. Until in the next year, I had another project, and I switched to JSON. I thought, oh, JSON is much cooler than XML. I always wanted to do this, and I thought easy. So I just Googled for a tool that would generate from some formal description of the service my code. So formal description of the API. I got a Word document, nothing against Word, which contained descriptions of my service, which were not complete, which were not always correct, where types were missing, and I had to figure out like what it really meant. The problem was not the backend developer wasn't so good. The problem was he started at the same time that I started, and he also wouldn't know how the service would look like because there simply was no time. So this was the best he could come up with in probably his first day. So there was no formal description, and also there was no generator, and also I found not many other tools that could help me. But I knew for sure I didn't want to search through the tree structures again and run into these runtime errors. So I want to have proper classes, and I wanted to map my responses from the server to the classes, and I also needed to validate the response. So is the value coming from the server that which I'm expecting, and is it of the right type? So I did simple checks with methods like is kind of class. So I introspect the type, and in case some value was not there, I would provide a default value, and I would log all the mistakes. So if some response came, I already knew all the problems I had with this response where I was expecting things differently. But there was one problem. This was very tedious work. So I came up with a solution, and I found out about the Objective-C runtime, and that you could get the names of the properties of the class and the types, and I would build a mapper that would do all the mapping automatically. So problem solved. Well, not really. It saved a lot of implementation work at some point in time, and I knew a lot about the errors, and it saved me a lot of debugging time because via the logs I would know in advance what the problem is before I see something wrong in the interface. But actually, because it was so dynamic, parsing took 10 seconds. Okay, it was on iPhone 3G, and the JSON response was 150 kilobyte, because all the detail objects were in one long list of 700 items. So I worked around the I worked around the problem with the parsing time in some circumstances where I just did some code by hand. I ran into another problem. Those were like complicated type. Complicated type means something like array, because actually the runtime could tell you that something is an int or a bool, but it could not tell you exactly what kind of object it would be. So for arrays and also optionals, I built some workarounds, but really the static code generation from WSDL to Objective-C was much better. So I switched to another project in another company some year later, and they were doing mapping already. The product already existed. So I thought maybe we could use my dynamic mapper, but it has so many problems. We were doing mapping by hand, and it was kind of tedious again, and also the responses were not validated, but I really wanted to have this because otherwise I would be debugging most of my time. So the approach was, what about I just take the properties from the class and I copy paste it to a command line tool, and it would generate me a function like init with dictionary automatically. So I did this. So in the end, this was helpful. This saved me a lot of time debugging and implementation. It didn't use the slow runtime stuff for looking up all the properties and the names, which cost the time. It only used the type introspection, which was still slow, but much better than before. But I still had the problem with my types for array, where I had to do special annotation, and yeah, it was all just some kind of hack, more or less. And there was another problem. Every time some property changed, actually, I need to regenerate the code, and I need to go to the same process again, and then maybe it costs more time than just writing one line by hand. So this was some kind of improvement, but not really good. Luckily, in 2014, I was in another project where I was also partly in charge of the API. So what I wanted was to have a formal description of what the API would look like with all the types and everything. And the, pretty much like WSDL, but for JSON. So we came up with a structure with data types where we have a class called class, and it would have a property called name, and it would have another property which is an array of the properties the class is going to have. So it's just a data type representation of what my classes would look like. And all this could be checked by a compiler. And of course, then there was some methods for generating code again for the classes, for the enums, and also for a service with all the methods. So once we had the specification, we already had the implementation. This was pretty good. On the server side, we didn't do this yet, but actually having this precise definition already meant for the server developer, he knew exactly what to implement, so there was only little mismatches sometimes, but very, very rarely. And for us, it meant if we add a new service method, if we modify some data type, it's just a modification of a few lines in the specification, exports the code, and everything works 100%. So this was really good. This didn't have any type checking, but actually the backend developer had the specification, so this was fine. And what it also did, it would now finally support type constructors, so like array, where you need another type to create your final type, array of int, array of person, of whatever. So all those was expressible in this in these data structures. So this was pretty good until I came to the next company, and I want to stop boring you with what happened. So the point that this was still JSON. And I implemented it from scratch, but this time as a command line tool, because actually what was a problem, I will come to another problem later. So the idea was to have a command line tool that everybody could use, and I would do the specification not in weird data structures, just in JSON itself. I could have done it in YAML or something else, but I thought everybody would be able to read JSON because he was dealing with JSON already. So this was a good first guess. And also what the app from the year ago had as a little tidbit was all the server calls were generated, yes, but like what network layer to use was hard-coded, so the communication was really JSON RPC, and having a new project where the server was already defined and it was kind of like REST style and these things, I needed to be flexible on what kind of responses the server returned and what kind of encoding the server wanted for my requests. They are not just all in the same pattern, because in the GET request you encode the parameters in the URL, but in the POST request you encode the parameters in the body. And from the server's perspective, this doesn't really matter. You have some parameters that you want to send, and you want to receive some data structures, and if it's in the URL or in the body, in the end the service layer shouldn't care. So what I extracted was the network layer. So now you could put in or inject the network client, HTTP client or any client into the service, and this would just work with any server now. So this was a big advantage, which gave the flexibility to connect to really any kind of backend, and if you as long as it supported JSON somehow. So this was nice. Also, the response validation I didn't like in general with this introspection because this is slow. So I switched it to message dispatch. And this is now much faster because it doesn't need any runtime stuff. Also, it provides fallback values, and it has nice error logging that would tell you about mismatched types or of missing values. So this was nice, and it was improved even more with helper functions like isEqual and description, which can be also auto-generated for classes because it's so boring stuff. And so I had a super good tool, but there was one problem, that editing the description of the service in a JSON file is really a pain because it's so verbose, and you have to put these comma and quotes and everything, and you have to remember, is it int or integer, or is it capital I or small I? I don't know, maybe I can look somewhere else in the file where I've used an integer to find out how I have to define it, because this was not really clear. And I wrote here, adding this by hand was a pain. I talked to a colleague this morning and I told him, and he said, yes, I know, I've done it. So people were crying for some user interface, and this is where I am at now with the JSON class generator, and here it is in the 2016 version. Now you can edit all your structures on the here on the left. So here we have some enum called gender and some instances male and female. Or here you have a class with called person with name, age, and gender. And the gender here references the enum, and the name is string, and the age is int, and there's much more types. And on the right side you see a preview, but actually I think it's not super useful because after seeing one preview and the code, you don't really care anymore how the code looks like. It just should work. And this is what it does. So actually this has been used in quite a few projects now, and yeah, over like the code generation is pretty much the same as in 2015, and it's really really robust and saves a lot of work. And now it comes with the ease of use. At the bottom right, you maybe see an export button. So what you just need to do is just press the button, and the code is there in your directory, and you usually don't have to import anything new in Xcode. Just run your application, and yeah, and it works. It's still internally, you can also run it with some parameter as command line tool, but I think it's not so useful. Why would you? So I want to tell you a little bit about the code that it generates, because I've seen so much code with regard to API in the past years. And we do a lot of code reviews in the company I currently work for, and there's just a lot of small things that appeared over time, and which I thought really a code generator should write good code. So one thing is that for classes, so for properties that hold instances of classes that have mutable subclasses, sounds complicated. So for a property of type string or a property of type array, what you really want to do is a copy of this item, because somebody, if you have a mutable item, could modify it behind your back. So for those kind of properties, automatically the property attribute copy is inserted. Or for example, automatic unboxing. So if you define something to be an int or a bool, what you see is an int or a bool, not an NS number with something containing the int or a bool. And all the methods are using the primitive types where possible, and all the wrapping then again is done automatically. I've commented 100% of the methods, the static ones as well as the generated ones. And what you can see here is I start typing my person. I wanted to initialize it, and there's some constructors. For example, init with dictionary, or person with archive data. So what is person with archive data? You could look at the comments and at the method, but actually I've added them all with @brief, which gives you the small advantage that in the auto-completion you would see directly what the method does. You would see the description, and the description is not of the type the function returns an int which is the result or stuff like this. You find in a lot of documentation. I really took a lot of effort to really write stuff that makes sense. So in this case you can init with archived data, and the text says securely decodes the previously archived data for the key root using an NS-keyed unarchiver. So this is pretty convenient. I could do it myself, use the NS-keyed unarchiver. So it's NS coding here. But I can just use the convenience method. So now I know. And also it says securely decodes, and what this means I will show on a later slide. But there's more stuff. So recently I've added 100% of all methods with nullability annotations, because I think it's very helpful. Also, I make use of the NS-designated initializer, which helps you when subclassing, like which method you should call at the initialization at the end to return a properly constructed object. There are prefixes for all category methods I wrote, so they don't collide with anything else. Usually in most projects I've not seen this. There's automatic collision resolving of C, C++, Objective-C keywords and names. What do I mean? I mean, sometimes you get a response of a GPS coordinate. It's called long and let. And then if you want to create a property with the name long, this won't work, because long is a reserved word for some special type of integer. The same for description. Sometimes you have a product with name and description. So you cannot have a property description, because it's already the function for creating a string from any kind of object. So what I do then is I automatically append an underscore. And should you do any kind of collisions with your names, I'm showing it in the user interface, but as well if you generate code, it will just be, let's say, description _1, description _2. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to encode this in JSON, of course, but the code will compile and properly work. So these are some nice things I added. So for the enums, maybe this is kind of boring. We have a function from string to the enum and enum to the string of the server and to some more expressive string that's used in the description method. So pretty boring stuff. For classes, I generate functions init with dictionary or person with dictionary, depends on the style you prefer. And they always return sane values. It means if something is missing in the JSON, it's initialized with some default value. For integer, it will be 0. For array, empty array. For string, empty string. At least your application doesn't crash and you don't see the null in the interface. You still have a problem. Actually, you could figure out easily with the logging, but at least your application will work. Then there is things like is equal and is equal to person and hash. And I really looked at the implementation of OpenStep, GNU-step. I looked at Mike Ash block, NS block. I looked at Stack Overflow and what AppCode did, just to figure out what's the correct way of doing it, because there are some really problems that appear when you do subclassing, and yeah, so usually I wouldn't write is equal in such painful detail, but if the code is generated, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can just have it and it doesn't cost you anything. Also, copy with zone, and copy is implemented. I'm using self class, so if you make a copy of a subclass, then everything works also fine. I have description, debug description, quick look description. If you don't know quick look description, this allows you, if you hover while being in the debugger, if you hover over your class, over your object, it will show a description right as tooltip, right at the spot. So this is nice and free. Debug description and description, most people, I would guess, maybe not most, but some people might not know that for if you run in a debugger and you print some object, actually it's not the description method being called, it's just a fallback method. The debug description method is called, and you can print in a different way. And I'm printing in a different way, so if I print some object of some class normally, I put the class name and then curly braces and then property 1 equals, comma, property 2 equals, and so on. But if I do the debug description, I add the pointer addresses of the objects. That means if you print some large structure and it's pretty long, then and you're interested in something in the middle that's strange, then you don't have to dig through the structure, index this, and then this property, and index whatever. This is also hard to find. You can just copy-paste the pointer address from the debugger and continue working with this and do more operations on it. So this can be very handy. Also, the easy approach for doing a description method would just be a recursive call. You call the subproperties, they return a string, and you insert it in your string. But actually what you do by this is a lot of copying, and it turns out you get O of n squared performance there. And if you print some large structures, okay, if you hit return, it's like, there's the result. Now with this implementation, I'm using string concatenation and passing a mutable string through the objects, and they just append, and you get O of n performance, so it prints super fast. Another thing that I always hated was for the default description for the string, it would just print out as, if it was empty string, like triangle bracket empty description or something like this. And if it was a string without spaces, it would print without quotes. And if it was a string with spaces, it will print with quotes. But especially if it was print without quotes, you could not distinguish on the output, is it a number or is it a string containing a number? And this is really, I don't know why Apple did this. But actually I fixed it through some category on the string. I'm not changing the normal implementation. I just have a a different way of description, which I'm calling in my description function. So you get proper strings, and they are exactly like you would write them in the editor. So you can just copy paste them from debugger to editor, and it will be always a valid compiling string. And also bools I print as yes and no, and not as 0 or 1 or something like this. Yeah, and then we have init with coder and init with coder and encode with coding. So I comply to NS coding, and I also comply to NS secure coding. And if you don't know, Apple introduced it a few years ago and said this is the way you should do it, because with the NS coder you have some small problems sometimes. Let's say you decode some object and you're expecting an object of class A, but it returns an object of class B. Then you just have a class B object, and then if you call some methods, it's probably going to crash at some point or cause other problems. And so they introduce NS secure coding, where you would say, I try to decode something of class A, and if it was not of class A, it would just return null, and you could easily check. So this is a nice idea, but it doesn't work with arrays because of the type system of Objective-C, which doesn't give you so many details. And the way you would describe it then is if you would extract something array of let's say array of number, you would say decode something, but allow array and number to be results. So what would then be allowed was that you just decode an NS number, and it was not nested in an array. And actually, with the language, you have this limitation. But at code generation time, I know all the types, so I can add the checks that are missing to implement NS coding, NS secure coding in the way that I think it was supposed to be used. So this is nice, and you get it for free, and you don't need to care about it. You just have this. Feature, and there's some convenience methods, like we saw, person with archive data, and which actually uses NS secure coding for archiving. So this is all nice stuff, and there's more. There's some categories on NS array. I don't know. I like stuff like map, but maybe you don't care so much. But one example would be you want to convert a data to a string, and it's UTF-8 encoded, and you would write NS string alloc init with data encoding NS UTF-8 string encoding. Write this on a debugger, and it's really a pain. But now you can just call like UTF-8 string, and you got it. And the same conversion you also have for a base 64 string. You have it for a date. You can easily convert to and from ISO 8601 dates. I think Apple also added it in iOS 10 or so to have a method for this. And for dictionary, you can just say to JSON, meaning to NS data binary representation. And there's more stuff. You can just look at it. You don't have to use it, but I think sometimes that's helpful. So pretty short about what types are now supported with the system. So you have, of course, all JSON types: bool, int, float, string, array of something, dictionary of something. And then for class and enum, of course, we have seen there's some special translation. But there's also decoding for base 64 data, ISO 8601 date, and Unix timestamp. There's also some more weird stuff like tuples or dictionaries, where the keys are really numbers encoded in strings, because you can only have strings in JSON dictionaries or JSON objects. So pretty much all convenient stuff you would like to have. And also you have arbitrary nesting, so you can build the wildest structures of tuples and array and maps and so on. And it will just compile, generate the code, and this will work. But sometimes there might be something that's more weird than all the standard stuff. Then you can still implement your custom mappers. Nobody stops you from doing that. An easy way to do this is just implement custom getter setters in a category. And so if you really want to convert your objects with longitude and latitude to a CL location coordinate 2D, you can do so. So this works pretty fine. And actually you can also model algebraic data structures, but maybe it's going too far here to explain it, but it still works. should there be any case where even this doesn't work, then there's always the option to get out of the data structure with raws, and whatever at this point is returned as JSON you have, and you can apply whatever you want just like before. Doesn't give you any advantage then, but there's no limit at some point. Personally, I've never used it. I just thought this should be inside, so somebody running into some problem always has some option to do something about it. For the generated code again, I turned almost all Xcode warnings on. I have 0 warnings. The static analyzer doesn't report anything. I also used faux pas. I used FBinfer, which is a great tool. If you haven't checked out, you should. It finds a lot of stuff usually on all projects. And I unit tested a lot of the generated code. Of course, since it's generated, I cannot unit test everything. But like for very extreme and default and cases, I've written unit tests for. So. Actually, I think the code is better than what you usually would write if you had, if you needed to implement something, especially for all the details you wouldn't care about in the normal case. But it's with generation, if the computer does it, like who cares? It's nice to have it. Then one thing about logging, I want to add. So instead of if I have some problem within some data structure somewhere, I really would like to know where it is. So you could pass through some object keeping track of your state where in the data structure you are, and in case of an error you print it. But with generated code you don't need to do it, because at every point where you generate the code you already know where in the structure you are, except indices of arrays. And what you can just do is return static strings. So in case of errors, this is just really fast to return. And it gives you the exact path. And it also aggregates errors. Let's say you have some long list of products and each product has the same error. Then what you don't want to have is 100 times the same error. So it aggregates the errors and it tells you this happened 100 times, which is especially nice is if at the end you log it to, I don't know, criticism, crashlytics, hockey, New Relic, whatever you log to your own server. Then you just have maybe just one request for all these errors at once, and you can choose like what exact of the details you want to send. Also, in debug mode, it tells you of things that are in the JSON that you don't use. It's not an error, but maybe something was added and you would want to know about. So you can. It doesn't make sense in production, because if you add something to an API, the old client should not complain that there's something new that they don't use. So why code generation in general? Well, it gives you fast code. Then sometimes dynamic code can do the trick. For example, I implemented some class for automatic description, which would just be like, or automatic description or automatic equal, which would just compare all the properties. You can do this, but in general, this is not so fast as statically generated code. By hand, you would never write this code because it's just a lot of work. And generating actually takes always much less than a second. I've got it to taking a few seconds, but then the result was 80,000 lines of code. But in the normal case, in 1 second, the code is generated. And it's not about this only. It's also about the maintenance, because what you can do is you just modify one value, and you have a lot of places where this has an effect in code, and updating this manually wouldn't make sense at all. Also, editing so creating new models is fast, editing the models is fast, and every time you modify something, it will keep track of all the features. So here are some more points. So the code always works. There's no typos or small things. Oh, I forgot, I didn't see, whatever. Also, like I said, one example is you have a typo in the name of a property and you rename it. And there's more than 20 places in code where actually now it's updated for the isEqual method, for the copy method, for the description method, and so on and so forth, that you would not want to do from hand. But it can also give you more features which are not possible usually, at least if you're saying like the NS-secure coding, where I would never write by hand this code for the additional checks. And so what you can have is like the implementations for everything, but you don't have to invest any work. So my message to you today is like, don't spend your time on decoding all these JSON or writing all this code for decoding JSON yourself. Just focus your time on the stuff that's important for your project, yeah, get the other stuff done by the computer. Yeah, so this is pretty much it. So the tool is called JSON Class Generator, if I may do some advertising here. And you can download it from the Mac App Store and there's direct download, or from my website. And there's a 2 months trial, and for the price, I thought if it just saved you, it will probably save you a lot more than 1 hour. But what is your hourly rate? And then maybe saving 1 hour, the first hour it saves you, maybe this could be the price. But then it might probably still be so high, so I thought maybe a good price would be $19.99. But actually it is on sale because this is the new introductory price, just $6.99. And we heard something else this morning I wanted to say in the introduction. This is the Christmas special edition of, Then I have some small Christmas present for you. So this is a voucher code, and actually it's free, it's valid today. Maybe because it's so late, I make it also valid tomorrow. Just download for free, go to the website, you can enter the voucher in the last step. So Merry Christmas from my side there. Some infos. First, the nullability stuff is implemented, but it's not in the released version. The released version is 1.0.0. The 1.0.1, I am not able to do it next week, so sometime after Christmas in January, I will release it with the nullability annotation. Actually, the current trial version that you shouldn't care about now anymore is 1 week. I changed it to 2 months. So those are these changes. I didn't tell you something else. While the code generator does all the code for the server stuff, I have not had the time to build the complete UI for it, so you can just add classes and enums, but this also is some help already. In the next version, I think around March, will also have a user interface for editing the server stuff. You could still edit in the JSON, but it's not so good documented. And also Objective-C generics. I haven't had time to implement this yet completely. This will also be in code. I think it will improve your code even more. And then for the next release, I don't know what to put in. I have tons of ideas, but there's a lot of these feedback forms on your places, and I would like you to fill them out and give them back to me. There's a box if you need more forms. I have more forms. If you need more pens for your colleagues, you can have more pens for your colleagues. So actually, people filling out the form can keep their pen, and all others too. Yeah, so this would be really nice. So I would really appreciate your feedback on this, because this way I can make it better and better and better, and hopefully more people will use it. So not about only the tool, also my presentation. Maybe it was too boring. Maybe I didn't do a demo, or whatever you would like to complain about, please complain. It will just save the people after you hearing my next presentation from my bad mistakes. Yeah, so you can give me the forms, or you can just put it in the box. So I'm pretty much through, and would like to thank you. And yeah, if you have any questions, now is a good time. Yes, please. Do we? Sorry? There's a tool from Facebook called Remodel. I haven't actually heard of it yet. Okay. I found this particular one I will look up. I haven't heard of it yet. There's a lot of tools that do code generation. I bought every one on the App Store I could find. But actually the code is, I don't want to say something bad. The code is not optimal. There's other tools also for protocol buffers. This would be interesting, but the structures there are different. So my tool probably will not support it. It could rather go towards different languages. I think where my tool is different than other tools is the generic way it can deal with any kind of server and deals with any kind of error, which I really needed during all this development, because most of the time people developing the server were in some hurry and had little time, and documentation was not up to date because the features were required to produce. And I think this really helps you in figuring out where are the issues and fixing your models fast. And also you can take the log messages and just send them to some developer, backend developer, and say, look, this is like different than I'm expecting. And then he says, oh yeah, but here's the new documentation, or oh sorry, I overlooked this, and so on and so forth. So I think this is different than most other tools. Yeah.
So you said that you defined kind of the thing in the JSON itself. Is it actual JSON schema, or is it kind of your own?
It's my own. I found JSON schema later. One idea I have on my mind is to write a converter between the two. I don't know if it's possible in every case, but since it's so similar, this would make sense. Yeah. So now you could think of the JSON file that I have more like it's a document format of this tool. Not so much. You would not want to edit by hand anymore. Yep. Yes. Okay, so a properly list serialization I also thought of. I think between property list and JSON there are some differences, if I remember correctly. For example, property lists don't have null, whereas JSON has, so you need some special encoding there. And there was also some other thing in the opposite direction where one would support one and the other not. So this didn't make it so natural to encode in this format. Also, personally, I think a lot of people asked me already for the archiving. It was one of the last features I added. Actually, I would just, if I encode and decode to from JSON, why not just serialize to JSON again and write in some file? So, yeah. More questions? Okay, then yeah, thank you very much again. So download it, try it out tomorrow. Sorry, it's a little bit dark on the presenter. I would really appreciate your feedback, also for the app after you've tried it out. Maybe you don't like it at all, but if I don't know, I cannot fix it. Yeah, and if you told all your friends and Twittered and blogged, yeah, I would be also very happy. Thank you very much.